In the onset of the Echoes, when Woody and I founded the group, by the way, that was not my real name. Tommy Van was not my real name. My real name came about by being on Belair Road and seeing a moving van, and Woody said, why don't we name you Tommy Van? And put another N on the end of it, and that's how I got my stage name, which was pretty creative of old Woody. But at any rate, we had worked at Hollywood Park and the teen centers. We worked every teen center and every junior prom and every senior prom in Maryland. I mean, we were everywhere, much like the Admirals were and the Van Dykes and some of the other great bands. I can certainly remember Woody had a problem with drugs, and I had to fire him, and it was the saddest thing I had to do because he was such a good friend of mine, and he was so nice. He was such a good kid, but he had a problem, and so we hired a drummer, Walt Caldwell, and Walt was the first black drummer with a white band that I can remember in a long time, and it was really neat because he was such a great guy. I mean, plus he was a great player. He was a great player. And Walt was just, and still is, one of the nicest and dearest people in my life. I talk to him every once in a while. He's a great guy. He has a church down in Severna Park or somewhere down there. He's a preacher. He's a wonderful guy. And some of the times we had were just wonderful. I can remember going up to New Jersey and New York to play at different functions up there, and we just had great road trips, and we had a lot of fun together. We had so much fun together. Fatback. First player in the world to do that was Walt Caldwell. He was the first guy to ever do it. I never heard another drummer since or before that could do that with a drum. He was a great, great player. I mean, he was just one of the best drummers I ever heard. I mean, he had such a great sense of timing and everything. He was good. And he could sing. All those guys were good. I mean, John Pillock, in his own way, was not a great sax player, but he was a great guy, and that made him a great sax player. That's what made him great. Walt Anderson was a quiet type individual, but just a great player. Doc, there's nobody else. How could I possibly explain Doc? Doc was an entity to himself. I mean, people looked at him and just laughed. He made people laugh. He was funny, humorous, and Gary Loomis was his own. You know, those guys were great guys. They were all good guys. Mickey Reed came with the group. That's when the group decided to break up. That was an unfortunate situation. Doc was about 6'2", 6'3", big guy, tall guy. Doc was a true bass player. I mean, the personality. I've always said that bass players have a distinct personality, all of their own. And I found that to be true with Tom Berry, Doc, and Denny Weston. They were basically the same type of person. Great guys. Anyway, Doc was always cutting up, always having a ball on stage. If anybody was going to be funny, it was Doc. He was on stage and off stage. He could tell great humorous stories and relate funny times, and he was a great guy. Anyway, Doc was on stage played this place in Hamburg. It was a dive, but it had an 8-foot stage. The stage was 8 feet tall. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I'll never forget, Doc tripped over his feet and went off the stage like a big piece of lumber, like this. Just went boom. Kept playing the bass as he hit the floor and never missed a beat. Rolled over, got back up, and finished the song down on the floor. That was Doc. And never, he was just, and with a smile on his face the whole time. I mean, he was hurt. He hurt himself. But he never missed a beat. He never missed a beat. He was a great guy. Still is. He's out in California somewhere. I made it a policy that there was no piece of music or no group or no entertainer that if we were going to play, we were going to cover them. If they were hot, we were going to cover them. We were going to do them. That's how we did the Four Seasons so well. We did the Four Seasons as good as Four Seasons because I knew that we could do that. And the other thing is I had great voices in my band. These guys could sing. They weren't, around the corner kind of guys. They could have sang on their own. I mean, that's how we had such great harmonies. But I really enjoyed doing covers of groups and sounding like them. And that's what was part of our popularity. We sounded like them. People said, oh, man, this is better than going to the concert. You sound like the Drifters, for crying out loud. Well, we tried to. We tried to sound like them because we knew that if we did, we'd get work and people would like us for that. Whereas a lot of other bands wanted to play their own music and people would say, please stop, do not play your own music. They wanted to recognize what was being played. They wanted to identify with it. People couldn't identify with people playing their own music at that time. They didn't want to hear it. Today it's a different day and age, different world. Well, the Beatles came along about the same time Tom Jones did, and I was doing Tom Jones. That's what I liked, simply because I could do him. But we did a couple of Beatles songs, but we didn't do a lot of them because none of us really particularly cared about the Beatles. And we weren't really Beatle guys. We were more Four Seasons, more Four Tops, more Temptations, more Motown, more... we were addressing songs that were Otis Redding, Drifters. And then we've infused, She Loves You, yeah, yeah. We infused some Beatles in there, but not a lot, because we were not a Beatles-type group. It wasn't our thing. There's a story about rock and roll, and it's being told today about how rock and roll, and I'm a firm believer in this, went south after the Beatles came out, went to a different place. And you're absolutely right that I can remember rock and roll when it was rock and roll. To me, John Cougar Mellencamp and John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen are not rock and roll to me. I can appreciate what they do, but it's not rock and roll. It's not true, basic, what it used to be. Harmonies, band harmonies, different licks on guitars, different beats. That was rock and roll to me. Songs that I would consider to be rock and roll would be Good Golly Miss Molly by Little Richard songs, Fats Domino, Bobby Blue Bland would be R&B to me, but stuff from him, things by the Motown groups I thought were great rock and roll, and a combination of rock and roll and Jackie Wilson. That era, that type of era, that great music back then, that's what I thought was rock and roll. That's why I make the analogy that today's rock and roll to me is not rock and roll. It should be named something else, because it's really a different type of music. They may say it's based on rock and roll, but it's not. It's an entirely different type of music.